Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad. Tehami, Chief of Army Staff General Syed Asim Munir has given the interim government all-out support assurance for the revival of the economy in the country and also to steer the country towards progress and prosperity. This particular assurance came during the fourth meeting of the Apex Committee of the Special Investment Facilitation Council, which was, of course, presided over by the caretaker Prime Minister, Mr. Anwarul Haq Kakar. The Apex Committee of the Special Investment Facilitation Council endorsed the projects approved by the previous government for attracting investments in key sectors which include agriculture, livestock, mines and minerals, information technology and energy. Also in other news, we saw that Pakistan stock exchanges plunged over 700 points at the closing today. With the rupee also, we see continuously remains under pressure. Now, according to the Forex Association of Pakistan, the Pakistani rupee depreciated to 323 rupees against the greenback. Well, according to the State Bank of Pakistan, the interbank value of the dollar was at 302 rupees. We'll be taking all these things up for discussion in today's show. For that, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Khalid Waleed. He is senior economist in the studio. Dr. Khalid, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. On Skype, we are being joined by Dr. Ali Hasanain. He's a professor of economics at Lahore University of Management Sciences. Dr. Ali Hasanain, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Dr. Khalid, when we talk about rupee remaining constantly under pressure, what core reasons do you associate with that? Wasn't there an expectation, especially after the agreement, the standby agreement between Pakistani authorities and the IMF, the value of rupee could appreciate ideally against the dollar?
Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, these are very complex times, I would say disastrous times. We cannot think that we would say that this is a dilemma for Pakistan, that after getting the IMF program, the expectations were that dollar would appreciate, and that appreciation of rupee would translate into the market and dollar rate would come down. But due to political instability, due to uncertain environment, due to uncertainty in the business climate, into the investment climate, this does not translated into the market, and rupee got the pressure and rupee started to plunge. What we need to do is we need to have these structural kind of long-term persistent structural initiatives so that this persistence can be achieved and this uncertainty can be translated into certainty, so that market gets the signal and market respond to it. Today, at present, market is not responding to the initiatives or the intervention that are being done so that we keep the dollar rate contained. At this point, we need to have these permanent and persistence policy so that policy consistency can translate into market stability. At this time, we need to have FDI, we need to have exports going into our economy, we need to curtail our imports, we need to curtail our circular debt issue, we need to curtail our energy requirements, we need to curtail our ongoing trade deficit, we need to curtail our fiscal deficit. But at the same time, there is a crisis going on in the country. First is that we are facing economic crisis, second is that we are facing energy crisis, and the dilemma is that both crises are linked. When we cater for energy crisis, we face economic crisis in the sense that we are under IMF program, we cannot give subsidies to the affectees of these price hikes of electricity. We cannot give proper relief packages because we are under IMF program. IMF barred us that we do not do these kind of subsidy. So these two crises are interlinked, and when we solve one crisis, the other emerges, and when we solve that crisis, the other one gets disturbed. So this is the
So what about speculation in the currency market? How does it basically work, and who gains from that?
Who gains from that? Obviously, in the speculative market, in terms of exchange rate market, in terms of currency dealers, they sort of hoard the dollar and wait for the moment when dollar price increases. This creates shortage of dollars in the market. When dollar gets shorted in the market, its price gets high, and after that IMF program, it would not come down because we are holding it in expectation that its price would go up, and at that time we will sell that in terms of profit. So this kind
of holding the dollar in an expectation of it getting a more price later on is speculation.
Is speculation, but when government decides that we are going to have this market operation and we are going to take action against these market agents, this creates another type of uncertainty and creates instability in the exchange rate market. The actionable policy way forward is to have these consistent policies, a very clear and straight roadway ahead, so that everybody involved in this currency market gets a clear signal that Pakistan is going to have a consistent policy of free exchange rate, market determined exchange rate, so that nobody is allowed to hoard market and hoard the dollar, and nobody gets a profit from it or black profit
I'll
from
come
it.
to you how this particular problem or phenomenon of speculation could be addressed, and how the government authorities can take the measures regarding addressing this particular problem. Dr. Ali, what core reasons, according to your understanding, are associated with the continuous depreciation of rupee's value against the greenback, despite the fact that Pakistani authorities were able to get the standby arrangement with the IMF after very tough negotiations?
So I have a slightly different understanding from my respected here. The IMF program is not intended to staunch the decline of the value of the rupee relative to the dollar. The core issue why the rupee keeps falling, and it has fallen throughout my life and beyond, is that our exports remain below imports. And there are structural reasons, as he has correctly pointed out, for this. In addition, investments aren't coming into the country, and that has to do with the large level of uncertainty that we have. But there was no expectation within the economist community, by and large, that the dollar would stop appreciating relative to the rupee in at least the medium term. There might be some short-term slowdown because there's a bit more certainty. You have some reserves and so on, but fundamentally, our whole issue is the trade deficit, the balance of payment crisis. That's why the rupee keeps falling, and we haven't really done anything fundamental to change that. So we really don't expect the rise of the dollar to stop until we do something fundamental on that side.
Dr. Ali, now what about speculation? What sort of an impact does it have also? What about hoarding, and how the authorities can deal with this particular issue?
Okay, so there is some speculation that happens in the normal business of working in the market, and that happens in every market in every country in the world. There is heightened speculation in some markets, and that tends to happen when you expect that the rate that is being officially set is getting further delinked from the ground reality of the market. So if I'm holding dollars today and I'm not putting them in the market, it is because I think that the government isn't doing what it should be doing at a fundamental level, and therefore, despite its best efforts, the dollar will continue to appreciate relative to the rupee. And so it is good sense for me to keep holding those dollars. Right? So a year ago, when we had the dollar at, let's say, 200, 220, whatever it was, the government was saying this is where the rot will end. This is where we'll see the rupee rally. And the market didn't expect it. And the market is the one that's been proven right. So if the government really wants to get speculation out of the market, it has to concern itself with asking the question of why individuals are not trusting of the strength of the rupee in a year. And that comes down to the simple fundamentals of our balance of payment. So you have to ask again, what's happening with our exports? Why are they half of our imports? Our imports are not at all high relative to our income levels if you compare us with other countries. But it is our exports which are extremely low. And that has to do with structural impediments that we have created over decades. And there's been nothing that's been done in the last 2-3 years. You know, we talk about the dollar daily, but there's nothing fundamentally being done in order to make investors more likely to invest in export-oriented industries than in import-oriented industries. That will have to come A, through having consistent dollar-related policies, B, through also reducing uncertainty about the economic future, and that has to do with our debt. Our debt is recognized by practically every analyst and every sort of agency as being unsustainable. We have to pay something like, I think it's 85 or 90 billion dollars in the next 3 years, which requires us to run primary fiscal surpluses, which we haven't run in 20 years. And we have to run these for at least 4 consecutive years. That's just the math for how we pay our debt back. And because that's very unrealistic, the logical consequence of that is that we have to think about restructuring debt, trying to extend the maturities. Our maturities are very bunched up, very short term. We have to sit down at a table with our creditors and talk about a better and more realistic plan for paying back our debt. All of that feeds into the foreign exchange market. And individual participants in the market are aware of those uncertainties, which is why the speculation is going on. Until we tackle that core problem, it's useless to worry about speculators at a very superficial level.
Right, Dr. Khalid, was your understanding what sort of measures, when we talk about hoarding of dollar, are there any ideal measures the authorities can take to address that issue?
Whenever governments start to have these counter initiatives or just to cater for this hoarding of dollars, it creates a panic in the market. It creates an instability in the dollar market. The actionable course of action would be that governments let the market run on its own, on the market forces, demand of the dollar and the supply of the dollar. Let the dollar decide its price on the market prices independently, address the structural issues. First one is the trade deficit. Second is that fiscal deficit. The third is the trust deficit that is persistence in our economy. It means that nobody trusts the government or nobody trusts each other. Market agents do not trust each other because there is uncertainty in the market. So we need to have this trade deficit contained. For this we need to have this export-led growth. Our growth is coupled with imports right now. Whenever we have achieve higher growth rate, our imports start to increase, and whenever our imports start to increase, or whenever we achieve higher growth rate, it involves higher energy consumption, and our energy consumption or energy mix is coupled with imports and on imported fuel. So this is the structural issue. We need to contain this.
You also mentioned, and also Dr. Ali also mentioned about exports, but enhancing the exports is not going to happen overnight. Do you think so?
This is a long-term phenomena. We need to have this long-term policy. In short term, we can do all sorts of things.
In the short term, how can we ensure that more dollar inflow comes into the country?
Yes, for this we need to make sure that there is a stable market, there is investment climate going on, there is consistent and persistent policies, so that investor take Pakistan as a good place for investment, or investment climate or ease of doing business should be established in the economy, so that investors come in Pakistan and they invest dollars into the economy, and those dollars in the industries who can export, who can generate exports, and those industries are dollar earning industries, so that not only FDI is coming into Pakistan, but also the industry as a result of that FDI generates or earn us dollars as well, so that this trade deficit can be contained. But this would be a very long-term phenomena. We would be needing consistent policies, long-term macroeconomic would be involved into it, and we need to cater all the actors, all the agents of the market into this decision making, so that a long-term policy or long-term planning can be achieved. This cannot be done in silos. We cannot ignore worsening energy sector, its financial implications. We cannot ignore our external sector, we cannot ignore our domestic market, we cannot ignore our exchange market, and we cannot ignore the geopolitics or global geopolitics that is going on in the world. So these sort of interlinked, and we need to cater for all the aspects, and then a policy with a politically stable government, then we can have this economic stability, and exchange rate market would be stable, and we can earn and increase our exports as well.
Dr. Khalid, do you think there is a possibility that the next tranche of the SBA from the IMF could be released earlier? Because there is an expectation it is going to review that one in November. Still 2 months to go. Do you expect if the next tranche is released earlier than the expected time, it could build that market confidence?
I think market confidence is more linked with what government try to do in the long term, or what government is planning for the medium to long term. It is not linked with IMF program, as rightly mentioned by Dr. Ali, that it is not linked with SBA program. It is what government decides to do. And for SBA to come early, I think we need to have this a very good negotiating team, negotiating terms with the IMF. The November review would be a very difficult one for Pakistan, because the government wants to give some sort of subsidy or some sort of relief packages, and government wants to have this want to create more fiscal space for the country so that it can provide some sort of relief to the consumers. It would be a very difficult situation, and it is a dilemma that when we want to provide subsidies to the consumers, it is barred by the structural reforms of the IMF. So it is a dilemma that is faced by the policymakers right now. One thing to do is that keep the policies consistent, keep your planning long term that is persistent, and keep the political stability intact, so that the market gain confidence and we have this investment coming into it and business are booming and blooming.
Right, Dr. Ali, do you think the solution could be in the very immediate term, the release of the next tranche of IMF as far as the standby arrangement is concerned, earlier than the expected time?
I think it really depends on what solution it is, what problem it is that we are trying to solve. If we are concerned with solving the problem of where the dollar is in November or December, or how the stock exchange does in the next quarter, then it would certainly help to get any money that we can get quicker. But I think fundamentally, it is this short-termism that has led us down this path. The fundamental problems are so clear now, and they're problems that we've been sort of having this angst over for the last 3-4 years. And yet somehow we, ironically, all of us continue to look in the immediate term and think about, continuing the behavior that we've had for decades that have led us down a bad path, and not try to really turn the corner. So let's recap. Number one, Pakistan has to pay back about $90 billion in the next 3 years, which requires us to run surpluses. Neither on the external sector, that is exports minus imports, nor in terms of government spending, have we run surpluses. So that's the first thing. Now, as you rightly asked earlier, it's unrealistic perhaps to think that we're going to suddenly switch from running deficits for the last 5, 6, 7 decades to suddenly running surpluses. We need time to do it. We can certainly do it, but we need time to do it. And so for me, any economic improvement, the path to any economic improvement must run through this debt restructuring that I'm talking about. And coupled with that is this question of economic uncertainty, which has to do with political uncertainty. We have to know who will govern the country in a year from now and under what rules, and we have to know who will govern the country in 4 years from now and under what rules, and that's something that's lacking. And it feeds into the calculus of both our bilateral partners as well as multilateral institutions like the IMF, who are actually sitting down and doing calculations on how much political uncertainty we also have. So there's the problem of political uncertainty. Let's leave that aside for a second. But fundamentally, anyone who's running the economy has to think, how will we pay back the debt that we owe? And to do it, there's no realistic path in the next 3 years for us to do it, which means that we have to talk with our creditors about giving us a larger roadmap. Unfortunately, whenever we have had those conversations or we've had extra aid come in, our politics is rigged towards giving subsidies and relief, which is great in a matter of months, but it's been very bad for us year on year. And so we have to figure out a path together as a nation. We have to figure out a path where people are not sort of becoming very downtrodden the way they are currently, but at the same time, we're able to have that time horizon for the next 4 or 5 years. That requires that debt restructuring, and for us to take out further loans on better terms that then give us breathing space to undertake those fundamental reforms that we've been neglecting for decades. We need a 5-year time window to do it. Absent that, all of these other artificial mechanisms that we've come up with, such as the Special Investment Facilitation Council, the one window operation, for example, to my mind are misguided in their approach.
Dr. Ali, I'll come to this particular point of the Special Investment Facilitation Council. You already mentioned of debt restructuring. Could you shed a little bit of light in detail regarding what could be the ideal contours when it comes to debt restructuring that could ultimately go in favor of Pakistan?
So, first of all, I'll give you the broad strokes of it. This is something where I've heard debt experts, and I've attended those lectures, but this is not my area as an expert myself. But the broad contours are that our debt is extremely bunched together. So our debt to GDP ratio is not that bad relative to other countries. Our debt to our tax tax collection is quite bad, but let's leave that aside for a second. Our debt is quite bunched up. That means that much of it is coming due this year and then next year and so on. So it's in the short term. What we need to do is sit down with our creditors and explain to them that we're not going to be able to pay back the loans as they come due. That requires us to get multiple different sort of types of creditors on the table, which includes multilaterals. Multilaterals typically don't take a haircut, so the IMF will not sort of write off loans for you. But we can have that discussion about extending maturities. So saying something that we'd pay in 2 years, let's pay in 5 years or 6 years. And of course, we'd pay back more, but then we'd have more time to do it. We then sit down with our bilaterals, which are negotiations that do happen all the time already, but they tend to happen rather than in an organized way, they happen in very haphazard ways when we're extremely running out of time, when we have absolutely no time left. That's when we engage with those bilaterals. And then that requires us to cede some sovereignty. And then we have the market, the loans that we've picked up from the market. We have to restructure that loan also. That process has to be guided by debt restructuring experts who, the objective of which will be to say, let's take, suppose $100 worth of debt that we have to pay back in 3 years. Let's talk about paying back 120, but in let's say 10 years, as an example. Right? So that's the restructuring of the debt. We're paying back more, but over more time, which is easier for us. And then, given the fact that we've taken on now a greater debt liability, it requires us to now do the homework in fixing our tax administration, in fixing our tax code. So that means making sure that we're not taxing different sectors differently. It means fixing our customs regime. It means creating more certainty. It means reforming our state-owned enterprises. The entire agenda of the economic reforms that we need, we start undertaking those so that we are then better able in 2025, 2027, 2028, and so on, to pay back loans, rather than us being back in the same place we are today, but with a worse outlook. The way, if you think about the crisis we've been in 2022 or 23, it's worse than the one that we had in 2017, but very much similar in contours, which was in turn worse than the crisis we were in 2008, very much the same contours. Yet somehow we never end up learning. So we have to get the debt repayment roadmap extended, and then we have to finally undertake those things that we've been shying away from doing for quite some time.
Right, Dr. Khalid, what's your understanding of debt restructuring, how important it is for giving Pakistan breathing space?
Yeah, while agreeing to Professor Saab, I would give a different perspective. First is that our debt is accumulating because of our unsustainable energy side as well, because our imports majorly comes from energy. Just to give you example, I'll throw some numbers. We import sort of $1 billion worth of petrol or oil products per month. If we just save 30% of it or make our self-efficient as 30% of it, we can save $300 million per month. It would translate into like $3.6 billion per year, which is equivalent to this SBA program that we are taking from IMF. So one way to do is that we look for those green financing options, or we go for debt to nature swaps or debt to energy swaps, or just energy transition partnerships, just like Vietnam and Indonesia has done. They made a plan. South Africa has done. They pledged for $80 billion. They received $10 billion out of it. They make a plan, a long-term plan, just to configure and make their energy sector efficient, and then they apply for this just energy transition partnership for G7 countries. They got that financing, and they are now making their energy sector efficient. They are solving their macroeconomic problem from that efficient energy sector. So we need to cater for this debt accumulating problem through a very integrated sort of approach, in which we integrate macroeconomics with climate financing, with sustainable energy choices, so that we have this holistic sort of policy, and we have this debt problem taken care of, and we sort of contain our imports as well, because our energy sector would be efficient, and we would be saving dollars in terms of imports that we would be saving in terms of efficient transportation sector, efficient electricity sector, and efficient energy sector. It will create a sense of sustainable energy sector in the economy, and it will attract more
so
FDI.
You already, Dr. Khalid, you mentioned that if we try to reduce it to 30%, right, when
yes.
it comes to import of oil products for energy needs here in Pakistan, is going to have a considerable impact
Yes.
regarding the debt mechanism over here. I'll come to you to take your detailed view regarding this particular thing. This is a very important thing, and how Pakistan can actually do this in practical terms. For now, we are joined on the phone line by Dr. Sajid Amin. He's Deputy Executive Director at the Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Dr. Sajid Amin, thank you very much for your time for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. As we all know that rupee against the dollar continues to be under constant pressure, depreciation of Pakistani rupee against the dollar, and today we also saw Pakistan stock exchanges also shedding over 700 points. Now, when we talk about the depreciation of the local currency, what immediate reasons do you think are associated with this fact, despite the that Pakistan got that SBA done with IMF also?
Well, thank you. I think this is a question that every Pakistani is asking, that there was sort of a discussion, if we have IMF on the back, rupee will be strong, and many people also believe that this will be actually the reality. But I think right now, if we can see in a very immediate term, there are 5 factors which are actually driving dollar up or rupee down, actually. I think the first is the external factor and then internal factor, but let me start with the internal factors. The election uncertainty is the biggest driver at this point of time. We do have IMF, but there is a discussion that there may be delayed in elections. We don't have any clear roadmap there. Some sort of fixed vibes coming. Election may be in 8 months. Election may be in 2 years. So this is really putting pressure and panic in the market that what is the fate of standby agreement after November? What will happen in February? So that is really driving the dollar up and rupee down. So that is number one, election uncertainty. The second actually is the import bill pressure. Once the government was going the PDM, there was a condition from the IMF that we have to let rupee adjust to the market, and there should be no LCs restrictions. We opened the LC, and there was renewed demand in the import bill. So the demand for dollar increased, the price of dollar increased, and conversely, the depreciation of rupee increased, rupee lost its value. So that is the second actually. But I think one factor that is really at this point of time very critical and catalyzing this depreciation, and it has really turned it into a spiral. You can call it a vicious circle actually. There is a condition of IMF that a 5-day gap or weekly gap between the open market and the interbank should not be more than 1 to 1.25%. Now, what is happening is that when there is a new demand for the dollar, rupee depreciates. People start buying dollar in a preemptive mode because they expect that there will be more slide. So they expect the demand for dollar increases. Interbank cannot meet that demand. That demand shifts to the open market, and the open market further goes up. So this is becoming a vicious circle. I mean, I have just written yesterday that let's assume that rupee in interbank today is, let's assume, 301 or 302. And in the open market, it is 319. So the difference is 17 rupees, which is roughly 4.575% difference between the two markets. But IMF is saying that there should be maximum in next 5 days, the difference should be below 1.25%. Now for this, we have two options. Either open market, rupee has to gain, which seems really impossible. We don't have reserves, demand pressure is there, central bank cannot intervene in the market, we don't have supply dollars to supply. What happens then, the only option that is left is that interbank has to slide further to reduce this 4.75% gap to 1.25%. And in the meantime, open market regains that difference. Rupee from 319 will move to, for example, 330. So again, that difference will be up 1.25%. So this spiral is going. I think I am asserting it at many forums that 3 steps will be needed. There are very limited options with the government, but it can try 3. Number 1, give a very clear roadmap for election. That when are we holding election? Let's assume there is a delay, for example. Let's agree that there is a delay, just as an assumption. But still then there is a clear roadmap. It's 6 months, 8 months, 10 months. What is the timeline? Government with election commission need to give a very clear timeline. Otherwise, pressure will keep coming that what if SBA is not there? What if IMF is not there? You cannot control the slide if you don't have any clear election roadmap. Number 1. Number 2, I think the Ministry of Finance and those who are engaging with IMF need to sit with IMF. That this condition of 1.25% in 5 days or weekly basis need to go. There are 2 options that can be done. The one is that this condition of 1.25% needs to be removed. You know, everybody believes, at least I am writing over the 10 years, that exchange rate should be determined by the market. But market does not mean speculative in the open market. You cannot leave currency on the speculation of open market. It must be determined by the economic fundamentals, not by the speculation in the open market. So this condition has to go, number 1. But if IMF thinks that no, it cannot go, at least we need to make it monthly or bi-monthly. If you keep this every 5 weeks correcting, and the only correction that Pakistan right now has, slide in the interbank, rupee will keep sliding. So this is the 3rd step that government has to take. And most importantly, I don't see anywhere State Bank of Pakistan at this point of time. One major thing missing from this is the right communication from the Central Bank of Pakistan, the State Bank of Pakistan. What is driving this the depreciation? What is State Bank doing for this one? What is it doing to control speculation in the open market? These arrests, these crackdowns won't help actually. They can create further panic in the market, and they're creating. I think we need to go for a right communication from the central bank. So these 3 steps can help government to reduce this slide gradually. But the limits are there. The government's options are very limited. So I've just given 3. And one last factor, that of course is an external factor, that dollar is gaining across all the countries or all the currencies. So these 4 to 5 factors are sort of causing depreciation in Pakistan, and the government is not applying the right options that it should do actually. Arrests, crackdown won't help. They will add to depreciation further. As I told, 3 steps government has to take, and the sooner it takes, the better it is, because unfortunately, Pakistan, my last comment is that Pakistan, unfortunately, I see it falling into the trap of inflation and depreciation strengthening each other. Depreciation is causing inflation. Higher inflation is reducing the purchasing power of rupee, and rupee is shedding further and further. The government need to take steps immediately, clear roadmap for elections, IMF engagement to remove this condition, and engagement from the state bank.
Right, when Dr. Sajid, a very comprehensive view you have just given on a number of points. When we specifically talk about the elections, there is of course a limitation of the delimitation, new delimitations to be done on the basis of the new census. So in that sort of a scenario, do you think the government is in a position to give a very clear roadmap?
Yes, of course. Government can give, let's assume that what is the timeline for a delimitation? It can give a clear timeline that we will be taking 3 months or 4 months, and these are the dates. You know, governance, I mean, this is the part of governance. You have a very clear roadmap. Election Commission knows that how much time it will take for delimitation, and then what are the required number of days after that. So you count them and give them a clear roadmap. Keep 1 month plus minus extra on the safe side, but do give a roadmap. I think this is not an excuse. That delimitation, of course, I mean, you agree if this is a constitutional problem or whatever, and there is some delay, but at least that delay counted there can be given a roadmap. So I think government should give a very clear roadmap, and there is a possibility it can give.
Right, talking about the second option, sitting with the IMF, asking them to remove this condition of keeping the difference between the rates of the dollar and the rupee for 5 consecutive business days, less than 1.25%. Do you think it is doable? And what's required on the part of Pakistani authorities in order to convince the IMF on that term?
I think government should have to give its own, give commitment and show its commitment that we will not intervene in the market. We are not intervening in the market. This depends on how you convince IMF, because if a condition which was put in place to avoid the artificial fixation that we unfortunately have been doing, if this is becoming a counterproductive, and this is actually causing that spiral that rupee will continue to slide. So I think this is how you convince IMF. They need to sit with, and even I've given another option that if IMF says that no, it cannot be removed, it can be staggered over a month actually instead of 1 week, because 1 month you give currency to adjust and then it will adjust. But every 5 days, every 5 days interbank is sliding, it's creating panic in the market. It is strengthening the speculative pressures actually. Because every 5 days it slides, people buy more because they know that interbank has to slide further. So let's buy from interbank and sell in the open market. So this is quite easy job. So this condition is actually strengthening depreciation, speculative pressure. I think if there is good work plan, if there is good team sitting with the IMF and they can show the commitment that we will continue not to engage in the market, not to intervene in the market, you can convince in either case staggered over 1 month at least or remove it.
Right, Dr. Sajid, when the IMF puts a condition on the authorities that the exchange rate should be determined by the market forces and the government shouldn't be imposing a cap on it, which was earlier imposed during the previous government, which was later on removed. Now, setting a limit of the difference between both the currencies' exchange rate to be lower than 1.25%, don't you think it's also goes in the same line as of imposing a cap rather than letting the market forces determine the exchange rate?
No, let me again explain actually. I do believe that market exchange rate should be determined by the market. So any of our government or the finance team, those who have done artificial overvaluation or fixation of currency, it has really done a great damage to Pakistan's economy and the credibility even. And that is what we are seeing actually. The current slide actually is somewhere driven by those practices that we have been doing over the decade. But I think they're two different things. Letting the exchange rate determined by the market is the right approach. If a condition that is 1.25% every 5 days, that is creating speculative pressure. So speculative pressures are not economic fundamentals based actually. They are coming from a perception that every 5 days interbank will be sliding and open market will be gaining. So people are really buying, putting pressure on interbank. Right. So the interbank depreciates. Pressure goes on the open market for increased demand. It gains further. The difference is not bridged. It further gains there. And then there is another slide, then there is another slide. So that is creating a spiral actually. These are two very different things. I think IMF has a good understanding if you can sit with them. Of course, IMF will not like to put any condition which is creating a speculative spiral. But government of Pakistan need to first recognize itself and sit down with the IMF. It needs to go beyond crackdowns and arrests of some sort of currency shops, currency exchange. This will not help. This will create a pressure. More importantly, more than government actually, this is the job of State Bank of Pakistan to sit with IMF and convince, because this is their own understanding of State Bank of Pakistan. They should convince IMF. I don't see State Bank of Pakistan anywhere in the picture actually. And that's unfortunate.
Dr. Sajid, your point is well taken. Let me just proceed towards Dr. Ali also. Dr. Ali, what's your understanding when we talk about the suggestions given by Dr. Sajid right now?
This Saab is a macroeconomist of some accomplishment, and I typically sort of respect his views greatly. And by and large, I agree with what he said. I think it's incredibly important, as he has stressed, that we know how the country will be governed in a year, and that requires us to have a clear roadmap. And his point about whatever time needs to be taken being clarified is very well taken. On the point of this sort of the rule, I think he is correct to worry about the 1.5% rule that becomes active within a fortnight. That rule has been put in place for reasons, as he has himself alluded to, that we have in the past tried to interfere too much in the market. And I think, again, as he said, if the state bank or at whatever level the government renegotiates with the IMF and says this has created something unexpected, let's stick to the spirit of what you're trying to do here, but extend the timeline in which we check this sort of gap between the open market and the official rate to, let's say, a month, 45 days or thereabouts. That would perhaps stem the pressure somewhat, and we'd get around the speculation. But again, I'd stress that this speculation is a very small part of the puzzle. Until we get political certainty and clarity on how we will manage our debt over a 5-year time horizon, we will continue to see an erosion in our purchasing power.
Right, Dr. Khalid, your last closing comments regarding what suggestions have been put forth by Dr. Sajid.
Yeah, agreeing to Dr. Sajid, we need to take care of fundamentals, economic fundamentals, and those fundamentals are demand and supply. Demand and supply determines the rate of dollar. Whenever there is increase in demand of dollar, its rate would go up. Whenever there is an increase in supply in the dollar, its rate would go down in Pakistan. What can we do to decrease the demand for dollar? We cannot put tariffs on trade. What we can do is we can do this demand side management in energy sector, in other sectors, so that we can have this efficient energy system going on. So our demand of dollars is decreased. In terms of supplying dollars into the market, we can increase our exports. We can have tourism going on in the country. In short term, we can bring FDI into the country. We need to negotiate. We need to have this recently the summit on minerals. That is a very good step. recently, these innovative sort of steps, these can exponentially increase the supply in the country in form of FDI.
How do you view a special investment facilitation council, one window operation that would be provided under its umbrella?
It's a good initiative. It can work as a catalyst, but I think what Dr. Ali and Dr. Sajid has said, that we need consistent policies, consistent frameworks, persistent policies, long-term planning, and clear vision and clear dates of elections as well, so that there is a political stability that can coupled with economic stability, and we can have this economic markets and other market exchange rate markets. They get stability through this consistent policies and political stability.
Dr. Khalid, Waleed, senior economist, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight and joining us in the studio. We really appreciate that. On Skype, we were joined by Dr. Ali Hasanain, Professor of Economics at Lahore University of Management Sciences. Dr. Ali, thank you very much for your time also for being with us. On the phone line, we were joined by Dr. Sajid Amin, Deputy Executive Director, Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Dr. Sajid Amin, thank you very much for your detailed view on this. Also, we really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Thank you for watching.